Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day. Any updates from anyone?
Well, I could talk about over the weekend, Dan Conley has office hours, and we had a sort of an open learning session where Dan introduced us to Agoric and their smart contracts and their platform. So it was enlightening to learn about object capabilities and what they're doing in regard. They're using JavaScript with a subversion of Jesse, and Dan was saying that the capabilities that language has is also available in Rolang. So he was excited. That's one thing he's excited about is the object capabilities opportunities that he'll be able to work on in Rolang as things move ahead. So
Yeah,
that was
so
interesting.
the channel model is basically, object capabilities, but with more rigor. Object capabilities in JavaScript-like things is not very rigorous, but but in a language like Rolang, it's incredibly rigorous. So you can give a nice, crisp, formal notion of what an object capability is.
Right. So that was enlightening to have Dan go over that. So looking forward to pursuing those opportunities in the future.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so our whole wallet mechanism is written with the object capabilities ideas as a part of its basic design.
Neat.
Yeah. Looks like we got Vlad and Kent here. Either of you guys have an update?
Hi, everyone. Kent, I guess, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So last week, I gave an update about this liveness proof.
2 weeks ago, but
2 weeks ago. And I'm not sure if you remember, so I'll give the outline again. The correct validators expect to be able to send messages to each other, and when they detect that another validator is faulty because they aren't able to send it a message or don't receive a message from them when expected, then they mark them as faulty and disconnect from them in the sense that they won't receive messages from them unless required by the full node condition. And so they disconnect, and because they do false rejection, and this forces the attacker to spend their faults and eventually get to a stable network configuration, or if there's a kind of stable connectivity. And then what the kind of correct nodes can do is they can find a fully connected clique in the connectivity graph. They find specifically the largest one. This hard problem, but they find the largest one, and then they only connect to validators in that, and then that largest clique will quickly come to consensus, giving us our kind of liveness result. So that's the kind of rough shape, and the question is, okay, can we help reduce somehow the requirement to have this fully connected clique, right? Because it's computationally difficult to find this clique. This is the maximum weight connected clique. I mean, people have branch and bound algorithms for it. It's like a NP complete problem. If I recall correctly. So it's basically, preferable not to have this clique. And so I've been trying to reason about how to avoid doing it, and have found that I have like a lot more breadth for avoiding it in the blockchain consensus than in the consensus protocol, where everyone is sending messages at every height. If everyone's always broadcasting messages, there's kind of on every edge in the connectivity graph, a message going by every time. And like that kind of updating of the graph where every node is updating its estimate at every time step is less stable somehow than if one of them does it at a time and then influences their neighbors by broadcasting to them. So there's kind of like in the round robin, for example, I haven't been able to find a counterexample. I haven't even been able to find like a single graph where that's unstable. And when everyone is broadcasting at every message, even if I remove a single edge from a clique, I can make it unstable if the weights are just right. And so this kind of make me think that these like round robin or like blockchain like approaches are somehow much more stable than the everyone broadcasts all the time kind of approach. Maybe because it like forces some synchronization. And I'm trying to develop basically arguments for reasoning about this so that I can give a kind of liveness proof that doesn't require coming up with this clique, and hopefully a liveness proof that gives or some tools that will let me reason more about the performance. So right now it's just liveness question of like eventually, but I want to reason more precisely about like how many steps, like how long will it take to get to consensus, and what will the overhead be to think about these performance questions.
Cool.
And so far, I mean, if you want to have like a complete round robin through a set of validators, you basically need a path, kind of like a circular path through the set of validators to do round robin. But you can go back and forth down a path and eventually get consensus. So if you like a max weight path also is potentially like, a problem that they could solve in order to come to consensus. But I'd much rather have something where I can, and I know that I can, have faults, right? I don't need to have every validator in this path. I know that as long as like some portion of them show up, then, or like some portion of them make it in the longest chain, then I'll get consensus. And so I want to be able to have like a much weaker kind of requirement for the connectivity graph to come up with a strategy that, is much more efficient for the validators to compute.
You might be interested to know that the way I was led to looking at the error correcting codes started with the analysis of round robin. I realized that I could describe the paths that you're talking about using polynomials. And then when I was thinking about the polynomials, that's when I started realizing that they were closely connected to error correcting codes.
So can you give me an example of like a polynomial and like a round robin?
Yeah, sure. And any word is gonna, and any word that mentions every single validator is gonna give you a path that gives you round robin.
What do you mean? How?
So if you associate to each validator a symbol, then any word that mentions every single validator is a path.
Okay, assuming there's edges in the connectivity graph along each adjacent letter.
Correct, that's right. Then you can do, but you don't, like now you can start adding stuttering. So like if you re-mention a symbol multiple times, right? So that gives you stuttering. And then you can do alternation. That gives you summation, right? Go this way or that way. That's summation. And now you have polynomials describing paths, which is not very different from process calculi at all. And there's a translation of the polynomials into Hennessy-Milner logics. But it was at that point that I realized that there was a close connection between them and error correcting codes. And that's when I went and looked at the literature and said, hey, has anyone ever used error correcting codes to do distributed consensus, and lo and behold, there was a rich literature on this already. So I didn't have to go and invent anything. I could just use the existing literature.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to use polynomials or error correcting code right now.
I mean, the nice thing is that it's explained, right? There's a whole literature on it. We don't have to invent it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know how certain error correcting code consensus protocols work. Kind of like Honey Badger, for example, where they do rounds of consensus and they have to reach the threshold. But the blockchain protocol does this kind of optimistic execution thing, and
no, it's much more. I mean, that's a specific instance. This is a much more detailed and broad thing, right? It's cool. About basically, as I've tried to communicate, the error correcting code gives you a bound on the amount of communication that you're allowed to have. And the way think of it as a kind of front end loading on the amount of extra steps that you might take in the communication protocol to correct for loss or duplication or reordering. That's essentially what's going on, and you can kind of do this up front. What the error correcting, there's a duality between taking those extra steps versus encoding and decoding. And this is just like there's a duality between, representing a data structure as a process or, representing it as a data structure that you pass around. Hang on one second. Hey guys, what's up?
So Vlad, I have a question about what do you mean by a max weight?
Yeah, this is my son's phone. This phone in Lincoln Park. We were going to go look at it.
So I mean, a max weight path through the connectivity graph. The connectivity graph. Hey Greg, can you mute yourself, please?
On the Avenue, which is not very far from there.
I guess
New Southwest.
Oh no.
So are you going to drop it off or okay? That's really kind of you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so there's like a
oh, that's really, really kind of you. Thank you so much.
I know, right?
Thank you.
Hey Greg, can you mute yourself?
Bye. Sorry, guys. My son lost his phone in the park, and someone found it, and they were just calling.
No worries. So, anyways, Ken, I was saying, the connectivity graph is kind of something you can build out of with the fault rejection directed graph. So there's like a directed graph that says like, oh, this node is assert that node to be faulty, this node is assert that node to be faulty. And then there's the connectivity graph is like, if there's not a fault detected in either direction, then the two nodes are connected, and it's an undirected graph. And when I'm talking about max weight path or clique, I'm talking about the connectivity graph.
Oh, so you just mean a maximum clique in the connectivity graph?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or a weight path, maximum weight path, or even a walk will do. To be honest, it's just not as efficient as a path.
I see. Thank you.
Cool. Is that your update, Vlad?
Yeah, that's my update. I mean, the other thing that I've been working on, and I've been working on a few other related topics, but for example, trying to make sure that there's no changes to the validity conditions because of alignment strategies. Try to see, as possible, at least at first, to abstract all that away, like not have any need to changes to the messages or protocol states. And another is to think about how can we weaken our synchrony assumptions in various ways in order to not have such a tight synchronous network. But I haven't, made a large amount of progress. Well, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure I could make it so that I don't need to change the protocol messages. I've yet to work out all the details, but I'm pretty confident. Weakening the synchrony assumptions has been a bit more challenging.
Yeah. Kent, any updates?
No updates on the research end. I do have a question for Vlad, though. So when doing validator rotation, I realized if you swap out, so if you do the, I guess, I don't know how to call it, the trick where you just say the new validator set is a completely different set of validators, then how do you get finality on the last set, or like any of the blocks produced, or like the final block produced by the previous set of validators, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's a little bit of a quirk, but basically, like, the validators will make messages. The validators, that made that last block will make messages at higher heights that don't get to have weights at higher heights. And so they're just like making some extra consensus messages. There's like this kind of extra consensus messages that need to happen in order to kind of stitch the different validator sets together. So it's actually slightly inefficient relative to just having a single validator set, because you have to have these extra messages that finalize that choice of block height that don't end up being in the longest chain. However, there are ways to, implementation wise, make that lighter, because these aren't going to have any transactions in them that are going to be executed. So they could just sign blocks from validators that they just inducted. And that would work from, as long as they include their previous messages. Then it's not equivocating.
I see. Is there, I guess when trying to implement this, I'm a bit worried about how to ensure that these validators will actually produce blocks past the last block point. I don't know what to call it, but and I was wondering whether
there's like, the protocol and there's the incentive. Both should do it.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it would be just simpler to have a shared set across the validator rotation.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well, so like instead of trying to, I guess, figure out how to align incentives so that the previous set of validators produce past that last block, if we just have some of the previous validators carry on to the next set of validators, and so
if you have enough of them, but when you do that, you reduce the maximum fault tolerance threshold.
Yes, I realize that.
Yeah, which is, it feels like playing with fire to me.
I see. Well, yeah, thank you. That's kind of what I've been thinking about.
Cool. Any updates just on the implementation side?
So last week was mostly moving the signatures over
Yeah.
to SegP 256K1, and also we changed the way we do lookups in the registry such that you can now actually use the name of the contract for instead of row ID,
Yeah.
a long string, you can do row lang either. And yeah, that simplifies the way you can look up various BLES contracts. And it also will help the migration from SegP 256K1, or sorry, to SegP 50, SegP 256K1.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see. Where was it? Oh yes, I'm not sure if this was. Oh yeah, never mind. Yeah, some quick refactors to make some of our Casper tests deterministic, and we did a lot of. I don't know if we mentioned this last week too, but we did more discussion on how to do node upgrades. And oh yes, the lookup simplification should help with doing node upgrades, because now whenever we need to update a BLES contract, it will still be referred to by the same name. And so it shouldn't. We were before struggling to figure out how to update, given how the IDs might be different, or if we kept it the same, then it would be, that would be more of a, I guess, a larger refactor on the registry.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that seems like a fairly decent thing to do.
Yeah, that's all my updates.
Awesome. By the way, I mean, I consider this to be R&D, to be perfectly honest. So I don't think we ever have to worry about that.
Yeah, one thing that I'm wondering more and more about is the extent to which the networking and peer management stuff is making its way into the consensus protocol, or should do, to avoid redundancy.
Wait, one more time, please. Did you say?
There's like a gossip protocol that we imagine that we're using, right?
Mhm.
And it's to abstract out of the consensus protocol.
Yes. Are you saying, you're worried that it's creeping in?
I'm not worried. I'm just, like I'm seeing more and more, like when in the liveness discussion, there's questions about, which validators are connected to which, and we start to get closer and closer to these kinds of gossip questions.
Oh, I see. Yes, that. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and we I think one, like, on in terms of the networking layer, we've recently swapped to use this. I forgot what it was called, but Sebastian, I think it's called like a max. It's something to do with clique connectivity, but essentially, instead of broadcasting all messages to all peers on the Kademlia table, we would reduce connections such that every validator is connected to every other validator with a fixed set of hops, and just generating this
But it's
graph.
done randomly. There's some randomization in that process.
Oh yes, for sure. It's but I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on this, but yeah, Sebastian had a paper that described the algorithm pretty well.
So I have a few updates if we're ready.
Go for it.
Yeah, so can everyone see the screen share?
Yes.
So this is on the research side. So, right now we're using a particular way to affect rates over channels, right? So one way to look at the cost accounting is to treat it as a way to put a rate on a channel. It turns out there's another way to put a rate on a channel, and then I'll tie this in sort of at the end of this update with a much older concern for rates on channels. If you go back to the early 2000s, there was considerable interest in putting rates on channels and using that as a stochastic model for reduction in process calculus, especially the pi calculus. And that has a very, very large range of applications, which have been pursued vigorously over the last 20 years. And I'll just touch on that. Of course, the interesting thing is, as soon as you do go to a stochastic reduction, then the semantics of the calculus gets a lot more complicated. And the question is whether or not, there would be some way to bridge between this notion of stochastic reduction and something that's a little less, stochastic. And essentially that's what this idea addresses. So I'll just introduce this notion of annihilation, which is really easy to understand if you just think about it intuitively. We say that two row calculus processes annihilate each other just if you have some R if you put them in par and they can eventually get to some process R, then that process eventually gets to 0. And the little formula on the page describes that in symbols. And if you think about that formula for 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, you'll realize that this says all paths lead to 0 when you put P and Q together. And so that's basically what you're saying is that P par Q terminates. And it always terminates under all evaluation paths. That's what annihilation is. So now we can take an idea from Robin. Robin said, suppose we have some kind of abstract relation on processes or on channels. That's actually what he was saying. Suppose we have some kind of abstract co-channel relation, then we can use that as the basis for communication, right? And in this case, we can lift that idea to annihilation. So if P annihilates Q, then we can use the at P and at Q as source and target for the com rule. Now, so anybody who's paying attention here will kind of note that, Annihilation uses evolution, which is based on the com rule. And now we've just plugged that into the hypothesis for reduction. So is there, do we actually get off the ground? Is there a loop here? And it's obvious that 0 annihilates 0. So you can at least get off the ground. And the reason 0 annihilates 0 is because if you put 0 in par with 0 in 0 steps, that evaluates to 0. So that's the base case of a recursive process that generates an infinite number of source and target names. So now let's look at some other names. I'm going to design a namespace, and I'm going to have a sort of a positive side and negative side to that namespace. And it's pretty easy to specify both sides recursively. And I'll use an index n. So P is a P of n is the process that's generated by doing a for comprehension using at P of n minus 1 as the target for receiving a data value at y. Likewise, hollow P or negative P of n is equal to at P of n minus 1 sending 0. And you bottom this out so that P of n is equal to 0 and negative P of n is equal to 0. And it's easy to see that, P of 0 is equal to 0 and negative P of 0 is equal to 0. And now it's easy to see that that P of n annihilates negative P of n. And the proof is by induction, right? 0 annihilates 0, and then your induction step is assume that, P of n annihilates negative P of n, and then prove that, P of n plus 1 annihilates negative P of n plus 1. And that's easy to see just by inspection. So obviously this is a space of processes that annihilate each other, and therefore gives you an infinite namespace that could be used for annihilation-based reduction. So far, so good. Everybody follow what I'm doing here? Don't everybody speak at once.
I'm just going to have to follow along. This is pretty advanced for me, but I'm just going to be quiet and just absorb it all.
Okay. Vlad, Kent, does this make sense?
I mean, kind of. I mean, it makes sense on some level. But not the most. It doesn't make the most sense to me. But sorry.
That's okay. All right. Is there anything that could be clarified for you? Do you understand the annihilation relation?
Yeah. But I don't think that like all terms will annihilate. Obviously, right?
No, of course they won't. We're just picking out the ones that do.
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking about hiding too?
Don't need to hide because we're using the row calculus. There's no hiding. Mm-hmm. And so once you have this idea, and that's why it's essential, like we're doing this in the row calculus. We couldn't use it in the pi calculus because you can't turn names into processes into names in the pi calculus, right? So it's essential that we're doing this in the row calculus setting. So it's essentially a kind of recursive reduction scheme, right? So rather than, reduce just on the basis of channels. You take the fact that the names are processes, and you recursively reduce those things. And if you get down to zero, well, then it's okay to go ahead and use these guys for communication. And of course, that will require taking the names that these guys might communicate over and see if they annihilate each other, and so on and so on and so on. Right? So you're just like recursively descending. And the one important question amongst many is, does that ever get off the ground, right? And zero is your base case, so it does get off the ground. And now all I did was to show that there's a lot more than just zero things that annihilate each other, right? So this is an incredibly simple proof that gives us an infinite set of names that annihilate each other. And of course, there's lots more than this, because I haven't used any par, I haven't used any deref or anything like that. But this is just one infinite set, and there's lots more than this. Okay, so now I'm actually going to derive a notion of rate of a reaction. So if I have a COM situation, a red X expression like this, I'm going to assign a reduction cost, and I'm going to assign a transmission of data. Right. So under the assumption that P annihilates Q, then we just take that reduction step, add the transmission of data step, and multiply it by the rate that's associated with getting this thing to go down to zero, which will of course recursively require a bunch of subsequent things. Right. So the nesting part of it is just done by multiplication. So here's an example, right? So we have P of n and negative P of n, and it's easy to see that in order to reduce these, you'll have to bump down by 1 and bump down by 2 and bump down by 3. So essentially, at P of n minus 1 and at negative P of n minus 1, that this reduction will reduce at a rate of r plus t to the n. So what we did, the real thing that we did here was to design a namespace that provides reaction rates that are governed by the binomial theorem. So that's kind of cool, yeah? That's a neat trick.
Greg, I just have one point of clarification. When you use when you say rate, are you referring to the as far as monetary, the cost, or the throughput of the process?
Oh, that is a great question. I'm glad someone finally asked this question. They're interdefinable, right? So you could charge for this rate, or you can guarantee this kind of throughput. In either way, and you could say, well, I'm charging you for a particular throughput. So they're interrelated. It's a very good question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really important question, actually. So the point here is that we can design namespaces to provide whatever distributions that we want. And to give a little bit more evidence for this claim, notice that this expression here begs the question, like we only defined it for these kinds of term constructors, but there are other par expressions that we can form. So we're going to need to figure out what this thing means for general par as well as dereference in order for this thing to be completely defined. I was hoping someone would kind of get uncomfortable and say, hey, how is this well defined? But anyway, so to go ahead and make it well defined, we just need a couple of definitions. So one is we say that P reduces if there's a Q such that P evolves to Q, right? So P has some kind of reduction. Then we define the notion of races as triples. So you've got an LR pair and a T, and P is structurally equivalent to L par R par T par something left over. And then we say that L basically P can either reduce by L going with T or R going with T, but not both. So there's a conflict there, right? So that's the definition of calculating the races that live at the level of P. Then we take, basically to calculate the rate, we take the normalized sum over the races, right? So that gives you a notion of rate right here for arbitrary pars. And essentially, it's okay to neglect any contribution from dereferencing because that will be handled by the transmission, the substitution part. So we could define a more sophisticated substitution-based part calculation where we calculate how much effort or work goes into the substitution, but that's not important here. And we could just set that to some number T, but T could actually be a function of the structure of terms. So it's okay for us to just simply set the double bar of dref to be 0. And so essentially what that does is it allows us, that now completes the definition of this recursive calculation, and gives us enough tools to define a very broad class of distributions from namespaces. So we can design namespaces to give us rates of reaction. And this all builds upon this basic idea right here that we use this recursive annihilation thing to get reduction. Right, so that's the core idea. So now let me relate this to what's going on in the literature beginning some 20 years ago. So what you're looking at here is some graphs of the rates of reductions of particular channels using a simulation machine or program called SPIM, which stands for Stochastic Pi Machine. SPIM is a play on words. There was an earlier class of model checking called SPIN. So Promella and SPIN have been used for process calculus-based protocols for about 40 years, 35 years. And SPIM was an update with the stochastic stuff. Now, these graphs are of models of a fairly sophisticated process. It's a biochemical process. And the biochemical process is associated with the formation of a peptide loading complex. So we have tapase that's related to essentially the production of peptides off of your some chain. So here's I won't go into this in detail, but I would recommend people read the paper if they are interested. Here's the set of chemical equations that's actually being modeled. And it turns out that you can turn all chemical equations into some stochastic pi code. And here's the stochastic pi code that in the syntax that SPIM uses. Let's see if I can let people see this. So this is their way of doing contracts. So they have let contract name equal. So we just say contract instead of let. And then their do is the start of a select block for us. So these are choices, and then each block is, you know, a sequencing. So uh, send on this, and then um, either receive on this or receive on that, right? Sorry, not in par, receive on this and then receive on that, not either. My mistake. So this is a par. So you can kind of translate in your head this syntax into Erlang syntax. So but the main difference is that in this setting, the channels have rates, and what I've been suggesting is that we, well, I mean, I can kind of cut to the chase, right? So the methodology here is that the rates, sorry, in this setting, the methodology is that you derive the rates empirically from lab data on a particular set of chemical equations, and then you use those rates and associate the rates with the channels in your pi calculus model or your process calculus model. And then you can go and check that when you write down your pi calculus translation of the chemical equations or the biochemical equations, that your simulations correspond to the the kind of results that you see when you run these experiments in the lab. And in fact, the nice thing with SPIM is that this has been confirmed over and over and over again, you know, from simple things like the formation of salt to much more complicated things like this MHC loading. So it's well established with the, you know, a 20-year history associated with it. Now, what I'm suggesting is that with the row calculus, you don't have to take on the burden of a stochastic execution model. You can use the recursivity of the annihilation. So you still go ahead and derive your rates empirically, but then you use those empirical constraints to design a namespace that gives you those rates. And that was sort of the whole point, that we can kind of design namespaces to give us whatever kinds of rates we wanted. And in fact, there's a whole method here that's available to auto calculate a namespace that supports the rates. And the interesting point is, well, there are multiple interesting points that I've been trying to get at since about 2014, when I first started thinking about the application of the process calculi to the blockchain space. There are incredibly sophisticated tools out there, SPIM being one of them. There are others. There are incredibly sophisticated tools that will allow us to do modeling, sort of, you know, at the economic level, if we use the kind of pun that Steve was pointing to, where we, you know, we use the notion of rate economically, and we use the notion of rate in terms of throughput, because they end up being correlated. So we can use tools like SPIM, you know, both, you know, like actually use those tools, or we can use some of the notions of SPIM to design our own simulation tools to get at a good view of how we might expect this system to evolve. And the other side of it is that once this kind of connection has been elucidated, then we can start to do quite a bit more along the lines of what I've been talking about from the beginning, which is to use biological protocols and lifelike protocols as a part of our design of protocols. And using the process calculi allows us to do that importation directly. So these kinds of biological protocols achieve higher order effects, such as the production of certain kinds of peptides, or the production of an immunological response, amongst others. And beginning to look, having something that allows us to look from this higher vantage point, and take advantage of what nature has done, through billions of years of evolution to build up processes that have certain kinds of effects, is very important. Because now we can start to utilize the wisdom that has churned out of this big, evolutionary gadget that's producing interesting protocols, and import them directly over into our setting. So that's kind of the other motivation for research like this. Anyway, so that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's refreshing to know that there's biological examples that we can kind of use to explain economic models. It's different people think in different ways, and the math explanations may be a little bit too abstract for people to really grab onto it, but using biological examples of what's happening in life may be that vehicle that we'll be able to leverage to explain the concepts. So I'm just kind of encouraged by the approach that you're using to explain these various concepts. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for.
Does this relate to the emergence of local time rates? Or
so it's an alternate path. This is just so I when I discovered the row calculus, one of the first things I observed was that I could have this kind of recursive notion of reduction, and it's not the same as emergent time, but they are related. The main idea is that you can build more sophisticated or higher level notions of reduction in terms of lower level notions of reduction. And that's kind of, it's reminiscent of the whole reductionist stratification in science, right? So in science, at the biological level, we think about a cell membrane, and there's some protein or sugar that's impinging upon that, and there might be a reaction if there's a corresponding chemical reaction. So now we drop from biology down into chemistry, right? And we go and check and see if there's a chemical reaction. Well, in order to go and check and see if there's a chemical reaction, we actually need to know something about nuclear chemistry, right? We need to now know if there's the right kind of nuclear structure to support the chemical structure. So we drop down into nuclear chemistry. And in order to do that, well, we kind of need to know something a little about the quantum mechanics. So we drop down into quantum mechanics, right? So this is the reductionist tower of modern science. And
it's like composition.
Yeah, exactly. But no one's.
You could do composition in, say, chem lambda.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly right. But here, what I've got is an explicit model of that reductionistic tower. Like in science, it's kind of all hand waved about, right? It's like we all sort of hope and believe that we're going to be able to get from biological phenomena all the way down to the quarks, and that calculation won't blow up on us. In point of fact, it does blow up on us, and it's a very, very hand wavy position. but everyone sort of has faith that it will all ultimately be sorted out. Here in this setting, admittedly, it's not nearly as rich as physics and chemistry, but at least I have an explicit model of that kind of reductionist tower, and that was the inspiration that was driving me to write this rule down. Can I model that scientific reductionist tower? And lo and behold, I could do that. I could actually design a calculus that had that built in. And then as soon as I did that, I noticed that I could use namespaces to construct rates of reaction. And that would give me something that was very similar to the stochastic reductions, without having to introduce the really heavyweight machinery that Cardelli and other folks have ultimately had to introduce in terms of measure spaces and lots of really, really complicated stuff. It's 30 or 40 pages of math to be able to write down the meaning of a stochastic reduction. And whereas there's one line, there's another line, and there's another line. So in 3 equations, I've now given a notion of rate, which allows us to design namespaces, which will give us whatever distributions we want. So that was the other inspiration for this approach.
Greg, we have 2 minutes, and I have 2 quick questions. The easy question first is on the screen, the double par. How is the double par different from the single par?
Well, this is the double par is like I'm stealing from norms. So think of this as like a norm on a vector space. That's the kind of notation. So it's this.
Okay.
This is like you put double pars around an expression and you expect to get a number out. Okay,
I'll go with that. And then the other question is, so when I think of this. Everything that you have here is this, as far as the feature roadmap, where would we see this on the feature roadmap? Would it be something after Venus or even further into the future?
No, we could potentially see something like this in Venus. And in fact, I have long thought that once we get the incentives nailed down after a few iterations, in Mercury, we could start doing SPIM models to start looking at the expected behavior from an economic standpoint.
And as far as the implementation of this, would that be more of a consensus, something that Kent would be working with, or somebody else on the team?
It plugs into consensus, but it's not necessarily. It crosses consensus and cost accounting.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed it. All of your brain candy presentations, I enjoyed them all, and this was enjoyable as well. So thank you.
Oh, sure, my pleasure. I've got to jump off and get to developer stand-up, but thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks. Bye.